All right, everyone. It's 6 o'clock, so we're going to get going. So welcome to the new Evaluator Training for LakeSmart Evaluators. We really appreciate everyone attending. I know there's a few folks on here that aren't necessarily new, but a refresher is always a good thing as well. So I'll start with our mission is to protect and preserve the value of Maine's lakes to benefit all who use them, both today and long into the future. So I have Andrea Stevens here, our LakeSmart manager, and she's just going to give a quick Maine Lakes background.
Okay, am I unmuted? I just want to say a couple things about the organization that we both work for. So as most of you know, Maine Lakes is a small nonprofit membership organization working for the protection of lakes and ponds across the state. We work to support everyone who values and benefits from clean water and healthy lakes in the state, including lake residents, visitors, lake associations and their surrounding communities, and the next generation of stewards. So our mission focuses on improving the relationship between people and healthy lakes, specifically how and why people act to reduce pollution and improve long-term water quality and lake health, because clean lakes are so essential to Maine's communities, Maine's economy, and certainly outdoor opportunities. So how do we meet these objectives? A few different ways. We advocate for changing behavior to keep lakes clean and healthy. We engage homeowners in our LakeSmart program, offer community outreach at public launches and other places for ways to reduce disturbance to loons and protect their habitat. We increase the public's understanding of protection needs and actions through our policy and advocacy program, mostly headed up by Susan Gallo, our executive director. We educate the next generation of lake stewards by leading a freshwater education network, which is new this year, to bring together educators and expand programming, particularly to underserved communities. And we engage a lot of volunteers like all of you, and hopefully support and train all of you, and as well as the Lookout for Loons volunteers. And LakeSmart is Maine Lake's flagship program. Yeah, we're all really excited to begin another season, and we're really excited to see all of you beginning to help the LakeSmart program, and several continuing evaluators as well and coordinators. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Andrea. I second that. We really appreciate you all being here. So I'm just going to get going with a little bit of lake science as a background to what we do as evaluators. So that kind of begins with the water cycle. And so it starts with precipitation, where water vapor in the atmosphere condenses to form either rain or snow. And that either gets intercepted or infiltrated into the earth. And so that's what's important for us as evaluators, this part of the water cycle right here, where rain and snow can be intercepted by the tree canopy, infiltrated to the ground, or run off to nearby surface waters. Obviously, the other place that water goes is straight down into the groundwater, where it can be taken up by plants. And then finally, evapotranspiration, where water evapotranspires from leaves and evaporates from surface waters. But like I said, for us, this interception, infiltration, and runoff is what we're most interested in as LakeSmart evaluators. So the biggest takeaway from this slide is that lakes are living. There is so much going on in lakes, from our larger loons, smaller crayfish, minnows, and then the cycles, the seasonal cycles of lakes, where in the spring and fall, wind and wave action completely turn over the water. and reoxygenate surface waters. So there's so much going on, and it's really important to remember that lakes are alive. This figure really just goes into showing more about the infiltration process, how vegetation on the landscape slows water down, and so that water can go down into the soil as opposed to just running off directly into surface waters. So we're going to take a look at this diagram briefly. This just shows how as we add human development to the landscape, we lose our infiltration and we get more and more surface runoff. So you can see in the natural landscape, primarily water is being infiltrated into the groundwater, and only about 1% is running off as surface runoff. Once we get minimal impact, you start to see we're getting a little bit more surface runoff at 2%, a little less infiltration, and a little less evapotranspiration because there's less vegetation on the landscape. Once we get to a large impact, our surface runoff increases even more to 15%, and then extensive impact, now we're looking at 50% surface runoff, 50% of water that is now running directly off the landscape and into the lake as opposed to being infiltrated into the ground. So here's kind of an example of what this is, probably somewhere between a large and extensive impact watershed. You can see that there's houses one after another. You can also see that between the house and the lake is primarily lawn. There's a few examples of forested areas, but for the most part, that lawn isn't intercepting much runoff. And so having development to this scale is having a pretty extensive impact on the watershed. So what happens when we get all of this surface runoff? The rainwater tends to pick up phosphorus, which then gets carried into the lake, and that can cause algal blooms. You can see this green slime. I'm sure some of your lakes have probably experienced this in the past. I know that there are a number of Maine lakes that have had some green summers. And not only are they ugly, they can also cause fish kills. Basically, the oxygen leaves the water and the fish have no oxygen and then they die. And so obviously this has a pretty impactful, or it's pretty impactful to the ecosystem, but it also affects property values too. I mean, there's a couple sides to all of this, but I don't think anyone wants their camp to be right up on a green lake. So there's a number of reasons why we encourage shoreline buffers to help prevent phosphorus from entering the lakes and causing these algal blooms. One of the main things that we try to address in the LakeSmart program is non-point source pollution. This image is a really good example of sediment that has been picked up by surface water and carried into the lake. And it's a really good example of non-point source pollution because by definition, there is no physical pipe or you can't point to exactly where the pollution is entering the lake. So it's basically coming from a large number of smaller pollution sources. For example, there's probably a camp road that runs, you can kind of see it on the left side of the image, a camp road that runs to all these camps, and the water probably runs over the gravel road and carries sediment and other gravel and things down to the lake and creates this plume. And so through the LakeSmart program, our evaluators are looking at individual camps to try and prevent that non-point source pollution from entering the lake. So why does LakeSmart really matter, right? I mean, we know that we want to prevent phosphorus from entering the lake. We want to prevent algal blooms, sediment plumes. This is all really important, and it's not getting any easier. So here's a diagram from the state of Maine, basically showing that the average precipitation in Maine is increasing or has increased over the last 130 years by about 6 inches. So the importance of LakeSmart is definitely increasing because this rain, we're not just getting it in small amounts over the summertime, we're getting it in more frequent events. So 2, 3, 4-inch storms are becoming more frequent and causing washouts, causing culvert overflows, all kinds of issues, which makes shoreline buffers more important. And all of the things that we encourage with LakeSmart are getting more and more important as we see this increase in intense storm events. Our lakes are changing in other ways as well. This was from the same State of Maine report, basically saying that the ice out is shifting. It's becoming earlier and earlier. I know that there's a Worthley Pond folk out there in our group, and you can see that their ice out has shifted over 3 weeks earlier. And this is important because it impacts the time of year when our lakes are turning over with those spring winds. And also, and obviously, our actions on the shoreline of the lake impact the water quality sooner because we're losing our ice layer. So that kind of concludes our little section about lake science. I just want to thank you all for joining LakeSmart. And now we're going to get sort of into the background of the program itself and Maine Lakes. LakeSmart was founded in 2004 by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection as a educational outreach program at the state's enforcement agency. So for 4 years, they ran it solely. In 2008, Maine Lakes kind of joined with them and started this transition so that Maine Lakes could eventually take it over. We wanted to see if it would work. And the problem basically with having the DEP run the program itself was that the demand was too high for the staff. They were running all over the state. There was all kinds of costs for travel. And basically there was tension. Homeowners didn't really want the enforcement agency on their property, or there were worries that during an evaluation, it might raise some red flags to the enforcement agency, and there might be some crossover between this voluntary program and homeowners trying to improve their property. And they didn't want to get dinged by the state enforcement agency. So basically, we started this trial in 2008 where Maine Lakes joined forces with DEP and eventually took over in 2013, took over the entire LakeSmart program. And then it's been like that ever since. Here are just some statistics about averages for each year. We do 6 to 8 workshops. We get 15 to 20 new evaluators. I think it's going to be a little higher this year because we had a pretty large group on Friday as well. We start about 3 to 4 new LakeSmart programs, and these programs just mean that a new lake in Maine has started a LakeSmart program. So a new lake association has joined the LakeSmart program. We have 60 to 80 active evaluators that do 200 to 250 evaluations a year, and they issue between 100 and 120 awards and between 100 and 120 commendations. And I'll just quickly explain the difference between an award and a commendation. The awards are folks who have had an evaluation done and they get really high marks, high enough, obviously, to be issued a LakeSmart award, whereas commendations generally, well, they definitely don't meet the same standards as the awards. It's sort of like a participation prize, but we want to say thank you to them for what they have done so far, even if they haven't met the standard of the award. We definitely want to say thank you, and we encourage you to keep working on your property, and hopefully someday we'll come back and you'll get an award. And finally, we have 7 hub partners. These are watershed organizations that have larger service areas and kind of act as a mid-level organization between the Maine Lakes Association and the lake associations. And I'll talk more about the 7 hub partners in a little bit. The basic principles of LakeSmart. These are really important and kind of what have you got to lose, right? There's no cost. We're trying to eliminate as many barriers as we can to homeowners. And obviously, if it's voluntary, they come to us wanting an evaluation. We're not forcing anyone to get evaluations here. And obviously non-regulatory. We're not forcing anyone to do anything. We just are offering suggestions and hope that they take our suggestions and work to improve their property. I want to talk a little bit more about the LakeSmart program and how it spreads. Like I said, it's completely voluntary. So it spreads primarily through social norms and social diffusion, because there have been a number of studies that have shown that information alone does not change behavior, right? We can tell people all we want that certain best management practices will improve their lake health. You can do shoreline buffers, you can do infiltration trenches, it's gonna help. You can say that all day long, but really the social diffusion is what helps spread the program. It's what is your neighbor doing? who is talking about LakeSmart, what's going on with your lake association, and sort of just person-to-person contact is really word of mouth is how the program really spreads. So this is an example of evaluations done at George's Pond. This first map was their evaluations done in 2018, and their program goes back a little further, but this is when we started mapping. And I just want to kind of go through the progression of where the evaluations occurred over time. So this is 2018. Then we have 2019. There's some sort of little clumps there. 2020, 2021, and 2022. So you can kind of see there is sort of a small pattern of each year there's little clumps in different areas. And I know that they have a really active lake association as well. So not only are they talking about LakeSmart on an association level, they're probably seeing what their neighbors are doing as well, because you can see over time these little clumps grow and grow and grow, and now they are a gold status lake with I think they're up to 50% or more of their camp owners have done a LakeSmart evaluation. So here are some ideas for LakeSmart recruitment. Like I said, I'm talking about it at your lake association, putting an article in your association newsletter or local paper. Anytime you have an award given out, a LakeSmart award, we highly recommend that you do some sort of press release with a photograph of the award winners. You could do mailings to lakefront homeowners, as well as door-to-door solicitation. A lot of this kind of depends on what your relationship is with your neighbors, how active is your lake association, what's your membership like, kind of impacts how effective these strategies will be. But once you get a few evaluations under your belt, generally people start to ask, you know, what does that sign mean, that LakeSmart award sign, and hopefully you get some diffusion, some social diffusion from there. So the LakeSmart solution, this is what the actual process of the LakeSmart evaluation and how we do our follow-up. What LakeSmart is. So it starts with the evaluation, and this is the homeowner usually brings their request to their lake association that they want a LakeSmart evaluation. And basically the evaluation is an opportunity for you, the volunteer evaluator, to go to their home, and you're walking the property and identifying problem areas on the homeowner property. So where is soil eroding? Where are nutrients getting into the lake? You can you'll look at the shoreline buffer, which you can see in this photo has a few different levels. So you have trees, shrubs, and grasses. And I shouldn't say it's just identifying problem areas. You're also identifying what they're doing really well. So for the example in this photo, what they're doing really well is that they have a lot of different layers in their shoreline buffer. That's really good. Sometimes we only see like grass up to the lake, or just ground cover, or maybe even just trees. They want to protect their view. But this is a really good example of a multi-tiered shoreline buffer. So we're also looking for what they're doing right. Other things included on the evaluation are a few questions about their septic system. Is it really old? Could it potentially be leaking? We're looking at erosion on their driveways. We're looking for rills and gullies. So there's quite a few different aspects of the evaluation, and you're looking for both good and bad things. This is sort of a diagram that gets into what the evaluation encompasses. So the evaluation wants you to be looking at the development footprint of the property. So basically anything that's been touched by humans. So lawn, driveway, parking areas, footpaths, and docks. We're not really looking at natural forested areas as much, but this is a good figure that shows, you know, what is our evaluation encompassing. So the next step is the homeowner report and making recommendations. So after you do your evaluation, we always do a follow-up called the homeowner report, where basically we're first of all thanking the homeowner for allowing us to do an evaluation, and then we're acknowledging what they've done so far to hopefully make their property more LakeSmart. And then also offering recommendations. And depending on how your evaluation goes, sometimes it's majority of making recommendations. And these recommendations include things like how to slow the flow of rainwater, where you want to slow down that surface runoff by increasing vegetation, such as through a shoreline buffer, to intercept raindrops. Basically, you want to slow down the surface water runoff and start to get water to infiltrate into the soil like we saw in the beginning of this presentation. And then, of course, we also want to reduce the risks of nutrients getting into the lake. And like I said, this could be through septic maintenance, making sure your septic tank gets pumped regularly, and then installing other best management practices such as rain barrels or infiltration trenches. There's a whole bunch of BMPs that could be suggested. And this is still part of the role of the volunteer evaluator. So not only will you do the evaluation, you will also write up this homeowner report. And we have lots of templates and things for these, so this shouldn't be too daunting. And so here are a couple of examples. I've been throwing out all kinds of best management practices. Here are a few that we recommend pretty regularly, and these were 2 projects done by YCC crews, youth conservation crews last summer. So on the left, we have infiltration steps. So if you have, or if the homeowner has a path down to the lake that looks like it has erosion or rills or gullies, you can suggest these infiltration steps, which basically are 6x6 timbers that are filled with crushed gravel. So, and rather than, for example, like if you had concrete steps, the water would just rush right over the concrete. This gives the water an opportunity to hopefully infiltrate rather than just rushing right off the stairs. And on the right side is an example of a rain garden. This is a good idea if you're able to divert any water coming off your lawn or development footprint. You can divert that into a rain garden, which is basically a shallow, I guess, trench sort of hole that you can fill with erosion control mulch and plant native species. This gives the water an opportunity to, again, slow down and infiltrate into the soil before it enters the lake. And I should say too that following this presentation, we're not going to go through all the best management practices that we have listed on our evaluation for recommendations, but I think all of them are located in the Lake Book, which is offered for free as a PDF online. And I highly recommend that you take a look at the Lake Book before you do any on-site trainings in the future. These are all really important to know, but there's far too many to be covered in this presentation. The third step,
Caroline, can I just mention one thing regarding that? So there's going to be a LakeSmart Evaluator manual that will come out early in the season. It's the first one we've had. And the manual is pretty lengthy. It'll certainly be online, and we're not sure we're going to print it, but it has a fairly lengthy BMP section in it that has a lot of photos of BMPs. And we'll also, on the on-site evaluation visits, the trainings are sort of the last part of your evaluator trainings, we'll be discussing some BMPs as well. So there'll be a couple opportunities for you to learn more about them.
Yeah, there's so many. Sometimes it's nice to have a little leg up when you start going into those trainings. But yeah, we're really excited for that evaluator manual to come out as well. Thanks, Andrea. So the third part of this process is issuing an award or commendation to the person. And this basically, we look at your evaluation, and then we have a series of checks and balances, which I'll kind of get into in a minute, where we have our hub coordinators look at the photos that you took during your evaluation and just see, does this raise any red flags? Do they have anything kind of weird going on their property, which doesn't fully conform to our evaluation standards? And they take a look at the evaluation again, and then we do a final check at Main Lakes. Just one last chance just to see if there were any discrepancies between what you saw, what your hub coordinator saw, and what we saw. And then if we all are in agreement that the homeowner should receive an award, then we send signs out your way and you present them to the homeowner. And each person that receives an award receives 2 signs, one for their lakeside, one for the lake side of their property and one for the road side of their property. So hopefully all their neighbors can see it. So yeah, like I just said, the award signs identify the homes of good lake stewards. And basically arouse curiosity, right? People see the signs and ask, what is that? How can I get one of those? And then they see the property behind it, right? So if you see this photo in the background, this is a very LakeSmart looking home where even the dock kind of cuts through some vegetation. There's no sandy beach, no lawn right up to the lake. There's lots of vegetation in the water all the way up, and you can just barely see the house through the trees there. So there's clearly a very strong shoreline buffer, and that's what we especially like when our award signs, when you can see the lakes, how LakeSmart the property is in the background. That's really important. So here's a little bit of that, those tiers like I was just mentioning about the checks and balances for the awards. So at Main Lakes, it's Andrea and I. She's the program manager and I'm the LakeSmart coordinator. And then we have our seven hubs. Then the heart and soul of LakeSmart are our lake associations. And generally within the lake association, there's a LakeSmart coordinator or a lake coordinator and a LakeSmart evaluators, which are all of you. So hopefully you all know who your lake coordinator is, and you're probably all members of lake associations. There are 7 hubs. Most of the ones in southern and mid-coast Maine encompass a lot of the lakes that are down there, but there are obviously a handful that are either way up north or down east where I am. There are definitely no hubs because there are no LakeSmart lakes up there. So here's a more in-depth diagram of the process for the evaluations. It starts with the homeowner expressing interest in a LakeSmart visit. Generally, they reach out. Sometimes they reach out to us at Main Lakes, sometimes to the hub, sometimes to the Lake Association. But regardless, the lake coordinator will get that information and assign an evaluator to that homeowner. And this is where you all come in. The evaluator will contact the homeowner to set up an appointment. You will then go to the appointment, visit the homeowner, and conduct the evaluation. You'll complete the data entry in Survey 123. If you're not familiar with what Survey 123 is, it's a data entry application for your phone or tablet. And this is what we use to track where our evaluations are occurring in the state. So you'll fill out your data entry and then send your thank you with BMP recommendations to the homeowner. This is that homeowner report that I had mentioned earlier. And that's sort of where your duties as a volunteer evaluator conclude. And then we start the review process. If there's any discrepancies, we might recommend a second visit, which then gets submitted again via Survey 123. And then there's that final review, either by the hubs, the LakeSmart hubs, or by Main Lake staff. And this is required. We just take a second look at all the photos that you've taken at the evaluation and just, make sure everything kind of lines up. And finally, the coordinator will notify the homeowner of either the accommodation or award that they're going to receive. And then, of course, we deliver the sign and they can hang it up on their property. And that's all I've got. I'm going to stop sharing, and then if you have any questions, you can either drop them in the chat or just unmute yourself, and we'll get those answered.